Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, home service pros, and welcome to Drips and Tips, a plumbing and home service business podcast where we will be bringing you valuable insights and tips for all positions within the home service industry, allowing you to serve your customers better, make more money, and ultimately be more successful in your home service business. Hello again, and welcome back to Drips and Tips. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Andrew Coronado, part owner and operator of Coronado Plumbing in Tucson, Arizona, along with my co-host and co-owner, Kristen Coronado.
Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Today, we are going to talk about a situation that has happened to all of us as home service providers, where our customers will say or do certain things that if we're not careful, will let us fall victim to a concept called the self-fulfilling prophecy. So the self-fulfilling prophecy is a concept that when we expect something to happen, or we assume a certain situation will go a certain way, we will behave in ways, sometimes very subtly, that will create that expectation and reinforce what we expected to happen to begin with. So any technicians, any sales professionals, anyone out there in any point of their life that have ever walked away from a situation and said, man, I knew it was going to go that way, you have very likely fallen victim to the self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, this is very easy to happen with CSRs, technicians, even business owners or managers. And it's where the customer will say or do things that will kind of create inaccurate and false expectations in a home service professional's mind. And the two best examples of this that we face on a pretty consistent basis, we're going to call them defensive behaviors. And these defensive behaviors will typically look like kind of making non-committal comments like, oh, I'm just getting estimates, I'm just shopping around, or requesting the minimum scope of work or the cheapest possible option before really any investigation or anything really has taken place on the call. And so before we kind of get into where this comes from and how we can avoid falling victim to, these false expectations that are set up for us, we kind of have to put ourselves in the customer's shoes and first understand the reality behind what they're saying. So when a customer says they're just getting estimates, just shopping around, let's take a look at the reality of that. Here's the fact. We live in a world where to get multiple estimates, and we all know we should, we all absolutely know we should, but in order to do that, you have to call 15 people, 10 answer the phone, 5 show up, and if you're lucky, 2 will get you the quote. It's just a pain to do so. So we all know we should be getting 3 estimates, or that's the general adage, but it's just a pain to do so. Ultimately, I think that people really want to continue to get estimates until they feel comfortable enough to move forward with a service provider. The other aspect is, and Kristen, you can help me out here, when you go to a store and you're looking at whatever, say a dress for a nice formal event, are you looking at the dress, the neckline, the sequins, the stitching, the fit, the form, the whatever, or are you looking at the price tag first?
Well, I'm looking at the dress.
Absolutely. And the price tag matters. I totally get that. We would be fools to convince ourselves that price doesn't matter at all. Okay. But even when we say, oh, we're just shopping around, you're looking at the product. You're looking at what you are going to buy first. Then you're paying attention to the price tag to connect the dots and then actually proceed with the purpose, or with the purchase, I should say. So when they say something like getting multiple estimates, we have to be aware of that reality behind what they're saying. The other thing that they may say, the notion of, oh, I just want the quickest repair possible, the cheapest repair possible. Fair enough. Now, let's take a look at that. Now, number one, what information they're basing that comment off of. The only thing they know at that time is that their stuff is broken, their bank account has a certain number in it, and they don't want that number to go down. That's what they're basing that comment off of at the time that they are saying that. Now, what we have to consider, are they qualified to actually make that judgment call at that time? Do they actually have the knowledge? Are they basing their decision off of the right things to still arrive at that conclusion? And that's something that's very important to consider, because they're telling you the truth. That's what they think they want at that time with the information they currently have. But if we as home service providers make the mistake of following them down that road without the proper education, diagnostic options provided, we are certainly not doing any favors, and we are participating in what is ultimately a bad judgment call. Now, if on the other hand, after all of our process options are presented, etc., they still make that choice, then that's perfectly fine. Then at least they're making the choice with the right information from the right place. So we have to keep in mind, no matter what position you have in a service company, when your customer says something like, I'm just getting estimates, what you have to realize is, okay, enter me. You're
Right.
getting estimates until you've met me, and I'm your guy. You just don't know it yet.
Yeah.
When they mention, oh, I'm just shopping around, fair enough. Again, enter me. You're shopping around until you have the right information to make a decision with the right information to actually make that decision with. So if we're not careful, though, we let these things influence our behavior, fly through calls, not providing the proper information, the proper procedure, the proper service to allow the customer to make a better and right decision with the right information. So in order to avoid this as home service pros, we have to consider two things here. First, we need to remember the overall fact that human beings are not very good at communicating what they actually mean, what they actually intend. As an example, if I say something is too expensive, I might actually mean that I just can't afford it. I don't have the money for it. If I say something is too expensive, I may mean, oh, I don't have a purpose for that in my life. It's just not something that interests me or fascinates me. So it's too expensive for me because I just don't have the use for it. If I say something is too expensive, it might just mean I don't think it's worth the price. I actually want it. It's just not quite worth the price. Or I may mean that I saw that same thing or what I think is that same thing cheaper elsewhere. But just hearing, oh, that's too expensive, it would be very easy for anyone on the receiving end of that to believe that it really is too expensive, that it is the price of the object instead of these other dynamics that are actually at play here. The second thing we need to keep in mind is we need to understand where these defensive behaviors actually come from so that we don't fall victim to the self-fulfilling prophecy. And these behaviors in our customers come from two places. One, the previous bad experiences that the customers have had and their fear of additional bad experiences. And the second is just kind of a place of ignorance. And I don't mean that in a negative way. We just simply don't know what we don't know. So diving first into the bad experiences, not to make you relive trauma, Kristen. You're a homeowner in the Scottsdale market. Because I'm lazy and I'm not going up to Phoenix on Sundays to fix your plumbing problems. When you call me, I act as an advisor and nothing more, and you got to call another plumber. You've had some doozies. So share with us what not only you, but what our customers are being exposed out to in their experiences with home service providers, and maybe not just plumbers, but this will paint a picture. Share with us.
Yeah, all of the gamut. Yeah, well, thank you. I'll share some stuff. I definitely have had some doozies. Left me a little PTSD. I'm sweating thinking about it right now. But I'm going to list a couple that I've had that probably don't sound that bad. And then there are a couple that are. But just basic ones I'll list off. Like I've called businesses, gotten no answer, and they didn't call me back after I left a message. I've been stood up by a contractor, scheduling the appointment, no show. That's awesome. I've had contractors over to my home, propose some work, and they left, and they're like, I'll email you that quote. And I'm like, cool, Bob. Never got it. That's great. I've paid for, small repairs to be done. Perfect. But then a few months later, I'm having the same issue. Call them, and they're nowhere to be found, or they won't stand behind the work they did for me. So I kind of have to start from scratch with a new company. So a big one is being quoted for like a large scope of work, and you don't have any evidence, diagnostics, explanation to back it up. And me not being a plumber, I don't know what I don't know also. So a quick example is I had a mainline stoppage in my master shower. I had a plumber come over, and he cabled and cameraed the line, 15-minute visit, and he slapped a quote on the table, one line, sewer repair, $25K. It was probably over that, but it was just one little basic line, sewer line repair, $25K, and left. And that's all I knew. I had no other information. So that was slightly terrifying too. Let's see. I'm going through my list here. I've definitely been a victim of just dirty, poor workmanship. Probably a lot of people can relate to that. Small things as handprints on the wall, or big things. I've purchased a sink and a disposal, a kitchen sink and a garbage disposal once at Lowe's. Called a plumber to install it, and he proposed me an option. I said, yep, let's do it. Let's install it. And come to find out, in order to install the sink, he needed to cut my counter, which is granite. Didn't know that. And I also didn't know that when you cut granite, it creates all of this dust in the air.
Incredibly fine dust, no less.
Oh, yes, it was everywhere. So I had that to deal with, and that was awful. I mean, just he left my house a mess, didn't put drop cloths or anything like that. So that was a nightmare. Let's see. Oh, remember my water line?
Right.
Yes, I had a high water bill for a while. Finally took the courage to call a plumber, and I had someone out, and he proposed a partial water line replacement. It was like 25 feet long, and he wrote me, again, a 2-line quote, just partial water line replacement, approximately 25 feet long, $1,200. And I'm like, sweet, that's cheap, but I have no idea what that's going to get me. So I slid it over to you, and I'm like, what does this mean? And you're like, let me write out what Coronado Plumbing would do.
Because I didn't know either. 2 lines, I don't know enough. So
right.
After rewriting the quote, tons of detail,
bullet by bullet.
Depth of the line,
Yeah.
Cutting the grass out in your beautiful yard in squares and placing it on the side, burrowing under the pavers instead of tearing them up and sleeving underneath those paver walkways. And what happened to the price?
My quote doubled.
Which wasn't even necessarily a problem, all things considered, because it was still, by comparison, cheap. And even if it wasn't cheap, at least you're getting a proper scope of work. But the fact that you would have entered into that with a completely unknown, unpredictable result, how could you possibly be happy with that result? It would be absolutely impossible.
Yeah, I didn't know what I was getting. I didn't know how deep the trench would be. I didn't know if it was tracing wire. I didn't know if it was code compliant. It was just a mess. So I got what I wanted. I paid more, but I was happy. I got a good job, and I didn't have to touch my grass or anything. So that left me happy. So that just shows, you're willing to pay more when you know what you want. You can see the value there a lot easier. Let's see here. Oh, well, the stories go on and on, to be honest. I could literally go on and on. But I have noticed, because of those traumatic experiences, I myself am doing those defensive behaviors. I'm kind of creating it myself. I'm becoming those customers that we kind of try to work with. And it's all coming from ignorance. They set up poor expectations, so now I'm tainted, and I don't know what to expect when I call another contractor.
And I think that highlights not only have you had these bad experiences, but that's actually the second place that these defensive behaviors come from, the notion of ignorance. And I think where we see this most often, or at least a little bit of an easier example, is with our CSRs. When the customer calls in, it's very, very common, almost always, as a matter of fact, the first thing that they're going to ask is, how much do you charge for X?
Yep.
And if a CSR is inexperienced and not mentally prepared for this or strong enough for this, it can create that impression as, they're just shopping around. And if you work for a more expensive company, it can be off-putting. You might even result in not booking the call and losing an opportunity because of this false presumption that they are shopping around, when in actuality, and the price matters most, when in actuality that's not the case.
Right.
They just don't know what else to ask. They're not going to ask if we deburr our copper before we clean and solder our pipe. They're not going to ask these important details because they just don't know any better. So that being said, and kind of keeping it with CSRs for now as the first position that's super vulnerable to these self-fulfilling prophecies, Kristen, educate me a little bit, at our company, what we coach our people, what you've experienced as a CSR, the types of things we have to keep in mind, the types of behaviors we have to make sure we do to hopefully change the customer's mind, provide them a better experience and service.
Yeah, great. Just really, some are really easy. And the first thing that my CSRs do is just be really friendly over the phone. Just as easy as it is. They're calling you because they have a problem and they need you to help them. So be that helper and be that person. Also, when you have that customer on the phone, super important to ask all of those identifying questions. Make sure you know kind of what the plumbing problem is, first of all, get a good idea of it. And also, if they have any underlying worries or concerns, you can maybe pick up on that, and that might help as well. And then as you're gauging all of that, you're putting that in the notes for the technician. So be very mindful of what you're putting in those notes. You don't want to necessarily transfer some of those defensive behaviors based off of some words you type in. An example would be an easy one. A customer calling and saying, hey, I have a leaky 50-gallon water heater. I need an estimate to see how much it'll be to replace it. Versus, I have a leaky water heater and I need it replaced. So in the notes, I would put customer called in, has a leaky water heater and wants it replaced. Versus customer called in, leaky water heater, wants an estimate. Now, it's just a very subtle difference, and you can do it or not, but choosing to eliminate estimate, that word, may open up the technician's mind a little bit and take away some of that presumption, they just want a number on a paper.
It definitely creates a certain expectation if you transfer that behavior from the customer to the dispatch to the technician. Again, if the technician is not mindful, aware of these things, mentally strong enough and prepared for these things, that can absolutely alter a mindset. I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, words, you can't read tone in words too. So it gets really tricky with that. So, and that's something that I like to do. It's kind of cute, is just leave encouraging notes. And what I mean by that is I've had a lot of customers call and say, hey, I use ABC Plumbing. They stood me up. I need you. Like, help me out. And I will put that in the notes. I will say, hey, ABC Plumbing stood them up. Let's show them how we are awesome! Exclamation point, smiley face.
I've seen like go be the hero and stuff like that. I like that. It's cool.
Exactly. Or go be the doctor, or whatever you want to say, just to like amp them up. It works for me. So I'm assuming it works for my techs.
It helps.
It does. And then another thing is like the defensive behaviors come from unknown, right? Like I'm freaked out to call a plumber or a contractor now because I don't know how it's going to go. So what I try to do is ease my caller's mind by like letting them know how it's going to play out, how our visit's going to go. We're going to call you before we get there with plenty of time, so we're not going to surprise you. We're going to show up and cover our shoes with booties so we won't muck up your house. We're going to take you through and teach you about your plumbing after we analyze your issue and show you where your shutoff valve is if you don't know. We're going to take your water pressure free of charge. All of these things, so they know what to expect. It's going to disarm them, and it's going to be more likely where they trust you because they already you set out the playing field.
Right.
So that's kind of easy. I mean, those are all pretty easy. A super basic one that you have to do is just thank them for calling you. Too. It's very simple, but they had a few businesses to choose from, if not more than a few, and they chose you. So we didn't sell the deal yet, but go ahead and be assumptive. Thank you for choosing us. We're going to take great care of you. We're going to kill it. We'll see you soon. That type of situation. So
absolutely.
But as a former tech though, I'm sure you have had those mind games in your head. So kind of tell me about like what a tech can do to prevent that mindset from taking over when they get dispatched.
Absolutely. Now to touch on one thing really quickly though, as you say, super basic, we're all doing these things, et cetera. Now, if you're listening to this, the likelihood is that you are doing this because you're seeking out knowledge, you're interested in your profession, you're trying to get better. So you probably are doing a lot of these things. But the simple reality is when you call a home service company as a customer, has any of this been done for you?
No.
So just something to keep in mind as we are discussing these things, how perhaps maybe we feel they should be normal. They might be, dare I say, second nature to us, or something that is common for our practice and perhaps probably for our listeners because it's just a higher playing field, if I'm not sounding too incredibly arrogant. It's not normal out there. And so that's definitely something to be proud of if you do exercise these things. All that to say, from a technician standpoint, the first thing that I have to do is recognize, again, where these comments come from. If the CSR does kind of get in the motions of transferring that defensive behavior on accident and they do say looking for an estimate, I have to, again, see that, acknowledge it for what it is, a smokescreen, a false reality that is based in these bad experiences, that is based in ignorance and not knowing these things. So I have to be mentally strong enough to recognize this and just let it slide off like water off a duck's back. I'm not going to hold that against the customer. So that's kind of first step one is just what we're talking about, the awareness of this reality. I'm going to be super, super friendly to the customer. The simple reality is that clients will buy who they trust from, but they also have to like you to trust you. And that only starts with a relationship. They have to like you. That's the reality. And it makes your job easier to like them. So establishing that relationship also just helps you do your job easier by working with another human being. It's always just made my job easier to be mindful of that. I ask a lot of clarifying questions. Now, some of this is kind of a common sense thing of I can't diagnose something properly if I don't ask the right questions, but I'm also going to ask questions that may seemingly be unrelated. So for example, if I go to a leaking faucet call, I already am aware of the fact that, I got to check out the big picture. I need to look underneath the faucet at the shutoffs, look at the drain assembly, because if those are very, very aged, if those have been installed 25 years ago and have lousy plastic components, that needs to be part of my discussion of what the possibilities are to educate the customer. But I might ask a seemingly unrelated question like, who else lives in the home? How many people live in the home? Now, that's not going to matter in terms of the condition of the faucet and the options that I offer. Right. But if I'm dealing, as an example, with, a gentleman there, and I ask who else lives in the home, and he starts talking about his wife, That then means that, let's say after my discussion, they want to move forward with a faucet replacement. Now I need to get that wife involved to make sure that she's not going to come home to a faucet she hates.
Yeah.
I don't want my poor customer deciding on something aesthetically. He's just trying to get stuff taken care of because he has been charged with the task of get that faucet fixed, right? So he might make a judgment call, and I'm setting him up for failure if I don't know who else is my customer by asking a seemingly unrelated question. Now I put this poor guy in a position to have her come home after she's tired, after she's had a long day, and then they get in a fight over a faucet.
Yeah.
That's terrible. I could have avoided that whole thing by asking what would seem like an unrelated question. So I'm going to ask a lot of questions, not just for best diagnostics, but for best service as well, to really get a holistic picture of who am I serving when I'm actually on this call. The other thing I need to do is educate them, but I also need to keep the education in their terms. If I'm talking about a toilet, I might mention something like a 3-inch flush valve. Well, that doesn't mean anything to a customer. So what that translates to the 3-inch flush valve is a nice, strong, powerful flush, meaning that plunger that's sitting next to the existing toilet that we're about to replace, you can probably put that in the closet because now it's much less likely to back up than the 2-inch flush valve you currently have. I need to translate that education into something that's meaningful and that matters to the customer. Otherwise, I'm just talking nonsense to myself. The two most important things, and some of this is going to seem very common sense, but the first is I need to demonstrate myself as the professional. And that seems like such a common sense thing, but it's really not. And what I mean by that, I'll use an example as a gas line. If I go to provide an estimate to a customer for a gas line, I need to make sure that I cover my bases in a lot of different ways. I'm going to get educated from the homeowner of how long they've been in the house, what their experiences have been, maybe what their long-term intentions are. They're going to see me measure the system, walk the property. They're going to be with me while I check the rating plates of all the existing appliances and I know my BTU counts. They're going to see me open my code book and size the system properly to their needs. But I'm also going to be the professional and maybe be creative in providing options of not just replacing the system they called me for, but also providing a potential upgrade for a future awesome Viking range that maybe they want to upgrade to in the future. Maybe they want to upgrade to a fire pit, a tankless water heater in the future. Now, maybe they don't want to do these things, but even by asking these questions and by providing these options, I'm highlighting the fact that I care enough and that I know enough about my trade and what I'm doing to measure the system, size the system, to actually consider different additions or upgrades that will benefit them in the future. Because at that point, it's all material costs. And the material is never the bulk of a job. It's always the quote unquote labor. The labor is the same. Whether I'm cutting or threading a 1/2-inch pipe or a 1-inch pipe for whatever BTU demand, it's all the same. And the material cost difference is really not that great. So just by providing those options and providing that education and asking those questions, I can set myself apart as the professional in a very, very major way that I don't believe my competition is going to take the time to do. The second biggest thing that I'm going to do is be incredibly detailed. Again, they're already going to see me walk the property, check the BTUs. I may throw out a little bit of terminology, but I'm not going to overwhelm them in terms of BTUs. They don't need to know that it's a British thermal unit, right? But nonetheless, I might throw a little bit of this terminology out to still demonstrate the detail, the professionalism, but I don't want to overwhelm them. Mm-hmm. But the quote that I leave is also going to be incredibly detailed. When I know my competition may be leaving a 2-3 line quote with replace gas system, if you're lucky, permits and inspections, and no warranty information whatsoever with the price, mine's going to be 30 lines long. It's going to detail the total developed length. It's going to detail the approximate length of all the branches, the BTU demand. It's going to detail the black iron pipe and the setting up of the threader and the cutting oil and the home protection of the cardboard under that equipment so I don't make a mess. It's going to detail Scotch coat and unistrut pipe and all the roof blocks that we're going to use. That's how we do it here in Tucson when it's above ground, on the rooftops. It's going to demonstrate all of those details that my competitors are going to leave out. Permits and inspections, that's huge. And all my competitors are going to leave that out. So if they do, in fact, get other estimates, even if that's their reality, that's okay, because then they'll be able to look at these, if they're lucky, 3 quotes, and they're going to be able to see, okay, I've got 2 lines here. I don't even know what the warranty is. I've got 5 lines here, but I don't no permits and inspections. I've got 30 lines here, and I know everything that they're going to do. 10-year warranty. I know that the permits and inspections are included. There's no doubt. So when they're comparing all of the detail on these quotes, it's little wonder. And if I'm $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, even $5,000 more expensive, it makes sense because I've demonstrated myself to be the professional. I've got sufficient detail. There is no unknown because I've outlined everything in unmistakable detail. And my competitors have left too much uncertainty on the table by not doing these things, demonstrating these things, and writing out these things, so that even if I am more expensive, there's so much uncertainty with that lower number that they're not going to go with them. And if they do, they may get an unpleasant surprise like you did with the plumber up in Phoenix. If you would have just said yes to that work, you would have ended up with a torn up yard, having to call a paver guy to have a whole other terrible potential experience. With a line that isn't at code depth, with no tracing wire, no shutoffs, and you know, all those other differences that we found out that doubled the price. So by being the professional and being so detailed, it increases the doubt and uncertainty that they're going to experience with my competitor, and it's going to make it much, much, much more likely that I'm going to be their plumber as a result of those things. Now, that being said, outside of being a CSR, being a technician, the last position that I think is very vulnerable to the self-fulfilling prophecy are owners and managers. And this is a tough one. The example I think that will illustrate this point well, I'm sure it's going to hit close to home for any managers or owners out there. The 1-star review because of price. Yeah, it's never a fun thing to see. And honestly, it hurts your feelings. It really does, because you believe in your company, you work so hard, and then you've got someone trashing you because of a number, or at least, again, self-fulfilling prophecy. It would seem that way. And this is where the challenge comes in. Over time, I have learned this to be true time and time again, that as I have reached out to these customers, now it's part of my training program that the technician absolutely needs to have a very specific conversation for, let's say you get a call for what is seemingly a very small issue, a jammed garbage disposal as an example. Well, the simple reality is to unjam that disposal, to clear that aerator, to light that water heater, whatever, those little small repairs, it's going to only take a few minutes. And the simple reality is the customer doesn't know and doesn't care that it takes several hundreds of dollars just to get your technician to their door. They don't know that, and they don't care about that. There is a very specific 6-point discussion that needs to happen with the technician and the homeowner in order for you to get paid properly for having your technician out there, even to do this minimum repair, and for the customer to feel good about it. Now, if you're part of our training program, you'll learn this discussion, but for the sake of simplicity today, the reason why I know it's not price, but that it is a value-based discussion is because in the unfortunate instances where we have received that 1-star review over price, and I make customer contact, I peel the onion, I get all that information from the customer, learn about their experience. I first, of course, apologize for the experience that they had. And in learning about their experience, I know the conversation that needed to have taken place to not have this outcome did not take place. And I very clearly outlined for the customer, this is what should have happened. This is the discussion that should have taken place, the service you should have received. Now, let me ask you, Mr. Customer, if that would have taken place, would you have felt differently about your experience? And out of the 20 or so times I've had to make this phone call, literally about 18 of them have said yes. Now, I also, self-fulfilling prophecy, I have to be aware, are they just telling me what I want to hear? Are they arguing or they don't want to argue with me? So are they telling me what I want to hear so that we can part ways amicably and not create any conflict? So I push it a little bit further, and I confirm that belief by, again, apologizing for this experience and offering, okay, in this situation, I can get you $50 off what you already spent with us and get you a refund of $50 off. Or, now you know we're not the cheap guy in town. I can also get you a $100 credit for future work. And again, 18 out of 20 people, they take the credit for future work. Now, the 2 people that take the $50 credit, it was about price. Right. So it's not that it can't just be about price. That is a very rare mentality out there, but that's just the fact. That review, that 1-star, man, when they skew you on price, it looks like it's just price, the bottom dollar. That's not a customer for us. They're just tire kickers and shoppers and that kind of thing. But that's not the case. They're a human being that has a problem, that wants good service, needs good service, wants to be treated fairly. They are willing to pay more money for a better experience, but they don't know how to express that reality. So it just turns into, they charge me X for 5 minutes worth of work and they rip me off. But after you actually peel that onion and after you actually explain how it should have gone and you give them the choice, is it really about the money? Do you want your $50 back, or do you want a credit for future work to continue to do business with us? And I know that we will do better. And I look forward to proving to you and showing you that we'll do better in the future. Which do you want? And when they take that credit for future work, that just proves it's not about the money. It's about the experience. It's about what they are getting for the money. It's about value. And that is something that a lot of technicians or a lot of home service providers out there, it can be hard to digest that reality. I tend to stay off of some Facebook forums because you get a lot of tradesfolk that just, they don't see that reality, and boy, do they feel strongly about it. So they will knock larger companies that may have a higher price point of ripping off the consumer, when the reality is that is not the case. Now, if you are a higher price company and you're providing bad service, you are ripping your customer off. That is absolutely a fact. But if you bring your A game and you provide the service that meets the price tag, your customers will absolutely pay it. They will thank you for it. They will leave you a 5-star review, and they will continue to call you back. We've proven it time and time and time again, and the industry has proven it time and time and time again. But you got to bring it first. That's the most important feature here. Now, all that to say, everyone joining us, here's the reality. Now, if we keep this in mind and we bring our A game when we encounter these defensive behaviors, we acknowledge that it's not the reality, that we don't want to fall victim to the self-fulfilling prophecy, and we still bring our A game, we will absolutely win. We will make money. We will serve our customers better than your competition, and we will thrive. If we are naive to that reality, if we don't believe that reality, if we fall victim to that self-fulfilling prophecy and we don't acknowledge the reality of those defensive behaviors, of just that, defensive behaviors, and we let it alter our service, we know where that ends. It ends up in the unemployment line when the company closes. And that's not a place I ever want to be. And that's certainly not a place I'm sure anyone listening wants to be. So everyone, I hope this was helpful. Definitely learn from this and be the best that you can be for your customer, because you deserve a good life. You deserve happy customers, because the job is just too hard not to have those things. So go earn what you deserve. Know those self-fulfilling prophecy is a vulnerability for us all. Know that those defensive behaviors are not real, and go bring your A game for your customer, because they need it and we need it as well. Now, thank you to God for everything he does and blesses us with us every day. Thank you, Kristen, for joining us. Thank you, all of the listeners, for joining us as well. We look forward to the next episode of Drips and Tips, where we're bringing you more awesome knowledge. And thank you so much again. We look forward to seeing you next time, everybody.
Thanks. Have a good day, guys. Bring it.
Bring it.